Hello and welcome to the folktales and legends associated with the great Colmcille. My name is Joe Brennan, a storyteller, and I'm going to share you just a few of the wonderful tales associated with him. And the first, it starts at the very start when he was just a child within his womb of his mother, Ethna. And Ethna knew from the very start that the child she was carrying was special and was destined for greatness. And she did believe deep down that it was a boy. And she had talked with her husband, and they had decided that if indeed it was a boy, that they would give it as a gift to the church. And she knew that this was the right thing to do. He would turn his path away from that as being a leader and a prince and a chieftain to the way of God and do great things. But Ethna was anxious. She prayed and wished for a sign that would tell her, well, one, that it definitely was a son, as she believed, but also a sign that they were doing the right thing, making the right choice. Well, as the pregnancy neared its end, it was late November time, the frosts were outside and snow was in the air, the smell of it was there. And Ethna, tired and weary one evening, retired from the main hall and went to her bedroom. She let her maid go away and she climbed under the blankets that were warm, and the fire was burning in the hearth. And the smoke was filling the room too. And she wasn't quite sure whether she had actually fallen asleep, but suddenly her eyes opened and she was aware of a presence. She was slightly scared, but then she looked and she saw, standing by the fire, a handsome young man with soft, beautiful skin that glowed in the dark, beautiful hands. And he smiled and said, "Don't be afraid, Ethna. I come with a message and a gift from God himself." Well, she sat up, eager to hear what it was and see what was the gift. And he reached his beautiful hands inside of his cloak and pulled out a piece of material. And he handed it to Ethna. And she took it in her hands, and it was yet another cloak. And she ran it through her hands and her fingers, and it was it was so soft and yet strong. Nothing the likes of it had she ever laid her eyes on, and she had seen some of the finest riches of those days. Well, she ran it through her fingers and started to spread it out on the bed before her, and it was so beautiful. But then suddenly she saw the angel's hand come down and pull it away from her. And she said, "But you said it was a gift." And he said, "This is not your gift. To see and to hold this is a gift in itself." And he tossed it over his shoulder. And she cried out, "Please, no!" But she watched. And as it withdrew from the room, she saw a vision appear on the cloak. She saw the land of Erin, and she saw the sea between Erin and Alban. And she knew it was a sign. It was a sign for the child within her, that child would be great and would have great influence both in Erin and in Alban over the sea. And the angel confirmed that indeed it was a boy within her womb, and that he would be great, and he was God's special chosen one. Well, he left, and Ethna fell into a deep sleep, a deep contented sleep. In the morning, of course, she told her husband, and he laughed. "You were dreaming," he said. "You were dreaming." Now, they had already discussed the idea that if it was indeed a boy, the firstborn, a boy, they would keep him to fill his princely role as a chieftain. But they had decided no, they would give him as a gift to the church. And now that decision had been confirmed. And they had decided that they would call him Colm, meaning dove. And of course he would spread his wings and travel throughout Ireland and over to Scotland, Alban as it was known in those days, spreading the word of God. Well, a few weeks went by and it was drawing close to the end of her pregnancy and the birth of her son, who they had called Colm. And on the night before he was born, she lay asleep, but she was woken from her sleep. She was woken from her sleep by a dream. Well, it was a vision. And in that vision, she was told, "Go to the lake, go to Lochgarten in the morning, and there you will find, floating on the water, a flagstone. Take the flagstone and bring it back here. And when your son is born, lay him on the flagstone. Lay him in the shape of the cross on the flagstone. Well, when she woke in the morning, she told her husband, and well, he laughed. A flagstone, he said? How can a flagstone float on the lake? It's impossible. But of course, he wasn't dealing with the human mind here. And she went with some of her servants, and there they saw, floating on the lake, the flagstone. Well, they waded into the water and lifted it out. Of course, it was heavy, but they carried it between them, and Ethna following behind. Now, as they hurried back, as the baby was coming closer to birth, she stumbled at one point and fell. And as she fell to her knee, one of her servants came and lifted her, and then saw that, well, some blood had escaped and was landed on the ground, and said, I should cover this up with some rushes. And she said, it's fine, let's leave it. Nobody else will know about it. We must get back. And that blood, and the spot where it landed, is where the garden clay comes from. The white clay that will preserve you from fire and sudden death and accidents and drowning. And to this day, people carry that white clay with them. The thing is, the clay has to be given to you. You can't seek it out. It is given as a gift. And when you receive it, you keep it, and it will protect you. And many people claim its wondrous and miraculous powers and carry it with them daily. And that was the start of many stories of Colm. And as I said, he was given over to the church, and he was given into the foster care of Colmcille. And he had his little cell down by Kilmacrennan, as we would know it today. And Colmcille lived there with him, and he was raised by Colmcille. Now the thing is, he taught him all the things he would need to know. He taught him his writing, he taught him the Psalms. But Colmcille loved the Psalms, and he loved the Psalter. The Psalter would contain the Psalms and was decorated and kept in a leather bag. And he would learn his Psalms, and he was a dedicated student. Now he knew something of the predictions that had been made, that he would be great. And he could feel a certain power within him that was growing stronger as time went by. And the first realization of that power and the use of it was when Colmcille, well, he fell as they were walking along one day on their way to visit a family who one of them had fallen ill. And when Colmcille turned around, he'd been reciting his psalm as his work. He saw that he was on the ground and he wasn't moving, and he ran and he lay down and said, please, wake up, wake up. And Colmcille was out and he was terrified. Colmcille was terrified, and he started to pray even louder and louder. And the rhythm of that and the volume of it rose and carried along the way to where there was a nunnery. And the nuns could hear it, and they had heard the cry as well. And they came running to see what was wrong. And they saw Colmcille, just a young boy, and they saw Colmcille, and they ran. And one of the nuns put a hand on Colmcille and said, I think he's dead. No, said Colmcille. And the urge came over Colmcille, and he reached out a hand and he placed it on the forehead, on the grey forehead of the man, Colmcille, and he prayed over him. And with that, whatever power was in Colmcille brought him back to life. And they all gasped in wonder at what they had seen, but they knew what they had seen was a miracle. And they knew that what they had seen was the power that Colmcille carried within him, a power that was a gift from God. As you can imagine, this story travelled wide and far, and long before he entered his adulthood, it was well known that Colmcille had great power, a power that had been foretold many times. Well, he left Kilmacrennan and went to Moville, where he spent 2 years with the abbot there, Fionbar. That story comes back to haunt us later in the life of Colmcille. But when he was there, he learned all the skills of copying the Psalter and put many hours into it. And then it was time to move on again. And he went and he spent time with Guillemon, where he learned oratory and stories. And then it was time to move yet again, and he made his way down to Clonard at the great monastery there. But as they travelled through the country, there was one day when they decided to rest. And as they were resting, they heard a commotion in the woods behind them. And they sat up, and suddenly out from there came a cry, "Help! Keep away from me! Keep away from me!" And a young girl came rushing out of the bushes, her tears rolling down her face, and she was terrified. And she ran to Gaumon, who was an old man, and said, "Please, you have to help me." And he pushed her behind him and threw his cloak over her. And then they saw a terrible sight come out of the bushes, a horrible, contorted, angry face of a strong and bruising man. "Get out of my way, she is mine, and I will deal with her as I please." She was a slave girl. She had no rights. But she cowered behind Gaumon, and Gaumon said, "Help me, Colmcille, help me." And all he could do, he had no weapons, was throw his cloak over her and bravely stand in front of Gaumon. But the brute, he pushed him out of the way with Gaumon too, and he pulled back the cloaks. And he took his spear and he held it to the throat of the young girl. And Colmcille said, Don't harm that young girl. Let her go. And I warn you, if you don't, well, as her soul enters heaven, yours will enter hell." He laughed and he drove the spear into her heart. And then he gasped and began to choke. He went purple in the face and collapsed on the ground. Now Colmcille had remembered how he had saved the life of Krishna Khan. And he believed that if he had the power to bring life back, he also had the power to take it away. And he feared that power. And he feared that he would kill somebody. And, well, that's exactly what had happened. And he carried that with him. No matter how often he told himself that he was justified in what he had done, he still feared that power. Well, he went on to the monastery at Clonard, and there Finian, the abbot, made him welcome. And we see another one of the stories emerge when he told Colmcille to build his cell beside the church door. He said it'll be good because in winter time you won't have to cross and get wet. You'll be right at the door to go in and say your prayers. And he told Kieran, the young monk, to help him. And they became firm friends from that day on and travelled together for the rest of their days. And as they walked and they got the wood they needed to make the wattle, to make the little cell, Kieran stopped at the door of the church as it stood. But Colmcille said, no, it's not here. And he walked on further towards the guest house. He said, but the abbot said, at the door. He said, this is not the door. For the church will be bigger in time to come because so many people want to come here. And then the cell will be at the door. And they built the little cell. And of course, when Finian came again, he wasn't pleased because Colmcille had disobeyed an order. He said, what have you done? This is not the door of the church. Ah, he said, it is not the door of the church now, abbot, but in the future it will. So many people will come to this monastery that the church will be built bigger and this will be the door. And of course, it was true. And the day came when his cell was right beside the door of the church. Now, the abbot, Finian, he had a vision. And in this vision, he saw two moons. One that was gold in the north and one that was silver in the south. And the one in the north was in the sky, and below it he could see Aaron and Alban. And he knew that this moon was Colmcille. And the silver moon that lay to the south was over the Shannon. And he knew that this was Kieran, his companion. They were destined, both, for great things. His time at Clonard came to an end, and he was to head on to the great monastery in Glasnevin under the abbot Movey. But before he left, Finian told him of his vision. And Colmcille and Kieran, who travelled with him, carried that in their memory, and it was to guide their steps when things went seriously wrong later on in the story. Now, when he got to Glasnevin. He was made welcome by Movie, but he didn't last long. He was supposed to stay there for some time, but a yellow fever broke out, a plague, and Movie sent everybody away. And he directed Colmcille north. He told him it was time for him to establish his own monastery, and to do so in the north. And he was to return to A, the King of Ulster, who was his cousin, and he would give him some land. So Colmcille made the long journey through the country, and it was a harrowing journey for the sights he saw as the plague passed through the countryside. And there was many a nights he knocked on the door of a monastery seeking shelter, and he was told, go away, sleep in a ditch. And that's what he did on many nights. And as he moved north, he came to the River Bure, and he fell on his knees at that river, and he prayed to God that the plague would not pass this river that ran from east to west and come any further north. And his prayers were answered, and the plague didn't. Well, he went to visit his cousin A, the King of Ulster, and he directed him towards Derry. And there in Derry he saw the hill with the wood and the fort, and he knew this was the place to establish his first monastery. And monks came and joined him there, and they built the cells and built the monastery. And on one occasion, some of the monks came to Colmcille and said, we don't have any more wattle to build with. And he said, well, then go and get more sticks. Go to the other side of the wood, and there's suitable materials there. And they went. And after some time, they returned with bundles and dropped them on the ground. But there was laughter among them. And Colmcille inquired what this was about. He wasn't impressed. Oh, we're sorry, he said, but well, we met a man, a young farmer on the other side, and he berated us, saying that we needed his permission to cut the wood. And we told him, no, we don't need your permission. We have the permission of Colmcille, and he has the permission from God himself to cut this wood. And they laughed, but Colmcille silenced them with a look. There was a time when his own conceit matched theirs, but now it was different. He had more compassion for people. And he said, do we still have the grain that A gave us, the barley grain? Yes, they said. Well, go and fill some bags, the worth of which would pay for the wood you have taken, and bring them to the young farmer, and tell him to plant the crops immediately. But they said, right now, it's the summertime, it's the height of summer, this is too late. He said, do as I say. Well, they knew better than to disobey the abbot, but particularly to disobey Colmcille. And they took the bags of grain, and they found the young farmer and gave him to him, and told him that he should plant them straight away. He looked at them and he says, now, plant now? He said, I've already planted my grain. If you look below there in the fields, you'll see it turning golden yellow as it ripens on the stalk. No, he said, it's too late now. No, they said, do as you're told. Colmcille has directed us. Trust me. Well, now the farmer was skeptical, but he went and he planted the grain, and to his amazement it grew. And it didn't grow, well, it didn't grow as it normally grew. It grew tall and strong, and the amount of grain he was able to harvest from it, well, it was immense. Impressed by what he had witnessed, he came to the monastery and thanked Colmcille for his kindness and for seeing him through the winter that lay ahead. He gave thanks to him, and Colmcille said, give thanks to God. And then the young farmer became a devotee and believed in the message that Colmcille was spreading. And while Colmcille loved Derry, he still continued to travel. And on one of his travels, he headed out to Tory Island, and he spent some time on Tory Island. And there on Tory Island, he ministered to the people and convinced them to turn away from their old gods to the Christian God. And there was great contentment among the community. Now, as you know, if you're familiar with Tory, it's a wild place, and the sea around it is wild. And the thing about these places is when the sea is wild and ships can get wrecked, they wash up onto the shore. And that brings a certain bounty for the locals. And on one occasion, after a huge storm, one of the locals walked along the shore, and there were the remains of a ship. And he ran to search through what had landed, when suddenly he came upon 3 bodies. And he touched them, and he could tell that there was still life in those bodies, and he ran and called for help. And they decided that they would bring the bodies to Colmcille. He had the powers of healing, and they brought the bodies up to Colmcille and laid them out in his small church. And Colmcille tended them and brought their energies back and brought life back to the three strangers. They had come from far away over the sea, not quite sure where they were from, but Colmcille tended them with kindness and mercy. And when they were fully fit, they joined the life on the island, and Colmcille sat with them each day and explained the Gospels to them and prayed with them, and they joined in the prayers and singing of the Psalms. And after some time they converted. And Colmcille one night felt it was time for them to leave. It was time for them to leave and bring the Christian message back to their own land. So a boat was prepared for their journey. And people gathered on the shore to watch them leave, and they were sad to see their friends leave, but they knew that Colmcille was right, that they had another journey to complete. And they headed out into the sea, and people prayed that they would make the journey safely. But alas, after 2 nights, a terrible storm blew up out of the ocean. And the people prayed, and Colmcille prayed hard, that they would be safe. 3 days passed, and on the 4th day, well, the storm had abated, and to the shock of the locals, the boat was on the shore, broken apart by the sea, and there they could see their 3 companions. But this time they weren't so lucky, and they had perished on the sea. Well, Colmcille decided that they should bury them immediately, and he thought it would be an idea to bury them right at the shoreline with the sea that brought them there washing over them for eternity. And the graves were dug, and Colmcille prayed over them, and they were interred in the beach. Well, of course, the next day when people came along, they found the 3 bodies had come above the ground, and this frightened them, because now they thought this was a sign from the old gods that they had turned away from, and the luck was coming against them. Well, they buried them again at the instruction of Colmcille, and the very next day the bodies were on the shore again. Grumblings started, and Colmcille decided that he needed to act. And he went to a man who lived up away from the shoreline, had some nice land, Dugan, and asked him could he bury the 3 companions there. Well, he said it would be an honour to have our friends buried on my land. So they dug the graves, and Colmcille sprinkled holy water and said the prayers to consecrate the ground. But incredibly, as he did this, those gathered round gasped and stepped back, as out from the ground came rats, big black rats, hundreds of them, thousands of them, and they raced away and down the shore and into the sea and drowned. They were frightened by the power of Colmcille. He drove them away. And from that day to this, it is said that you will not find a rat on Tory Island. And from that day to this, it said, well, if you get some of that clay, that black clay from Tory, and bring it to your house, it will keep rats away from your house. People building a new house sometimes will go and ask for the clay, because indeed you can ask for the clay and put it into foundations. And I remember being out on the island telling stories some years ago, and of course I was intrigued to hear what some of the locals would make of the story. And they knew it, of course. And one person told me one day that some lads who were over in London working were coming back, and they decided they were going to test out this theory, and they bought a pet rat from the pet shop. And the story goes that as soon as it was put up on the pier, as you know, when you arrive in Tory, the bags go up onto the pier, that as soon as the bag landed, well, the rat perished. And there's still no rats on Tory. I love that story. I heard that story of all things on the radio. I was sitting listening to the radio. I had moved to Donegal a short time and was telling stories, and I heard it, and of course I was intrigued by the story. And I kind of got it in my head and I learned it. But I was sharing it sometime later during Belton, and I introduced the story, and I had said I had heard it on the radio. And this man said, oh, that was me. Bill Gallagher was his name. He had lived in Canada for years and had moved back, and it was incredible to meet him. And he was like, oh no, you tell it. And it's one I've been sharing wide and far in many places over the years. There's another story that I like as well that involves the River Lennon in Ramelton. You know, the picturesque valley that it creates and how beautiful it is, and people stop there, and how many paintings have you seen of it? Well, the story is told that Colmcille had come to Ramelton, and he noticed that the cows, their bones stuck through their skin because there was a great drought and people couldn't spare the water to feed the cows. And Colmcille knew he needed to do something, and of course he knew where he could find water. And he headed back to his home place in Garden. And he came to the bottom of the lower loch and he called out to the water, "Lanham, Lanham." And the water started to follow Colmcille. And he made his way down back towards Ramelton, and as he did, the water followed behind him gently and slowly, keeping a pace with Colmcille. And when at last he came to that spot between Milford and Kilmacrennan, where you see Loch Fern, well, he was tired in the hot sun, and he took a rest in that hollow. And he fell asleep, unknown to himself, of course. Unknown too that the water was still following, but had nowhere to go. So when he awoke sometimes later, his eyes opened and he was startled to see that vast body of water had gathered at his feet. He smiled. He got up and he said, "Lanham, Arish," and he headed on all the way back down to Ramelton, with the river following behind him. And on it flowed down into Ramelton and out into Loch Swilly as we know it today. And it became known as the River Lenning in time, Lanham being anglicised. And that's the story. It's a simple story, but I like it. It's one of those ones that sticks in the mind. So there's many, many great stories, as I say, with Colmcille. Now, of course, we all know the story of the great battle over the Solster that he copied from Finbar, the abbot in Moville, that caused such friction and led to war, of all things. The first dispute of copyright, it's often referred to. And of course, Colmcille wrote many, many Bibles, copying the script, the Psalms and Psalters in beautiful, beautiful hand and skill. And he would leave them as gifts to many, many monasteries. And it was said, and it was proven, that they were sacred in that water or fire could not damage them. Indeed, people said that the only thing that burned in a fire was the leather case that it came in. His reputation was huge. And of course, as a result of that war that took place at Drumcliff in the shadow of Ben Bulben, he decided that he should leave the country. Even though he won the battle, well, he lost a lot more. And he was reminded when he was wondering what to do next by Ciarán, and he said, "You remember Finian's vision of this moon in the north, the golden moon, and Alban and Aaron?" And indeed, he reminded him of his mother's vision of the cloak, again, of Aaron and Alban. So they left, and they went to Scotland, and they ended up on the island of Iona, as it was called then, with their back to Ireland, so he couldn't lay eyes on it again. And Colmcille, after he had established his monastery on on Iona, then it was time to turn his attention to the mainland, to go there and preach to the Picts and turn them away from the old gods towards the Christian God. And he went and he journeyed to the king, and after some time convinced him to allow him to go among the people. And he spent much time doing that work. And then he decided it was time to return to Iona at one point. And they set out to cross the Ness River, which was near Bruce Fort. And as they both set out in the dull mist of the morning, they heard a commotion on the far shore, and then they heard wailing that could only be associated with a funeral. Well, Colmcille, as soon as the boat came to the edge, he jumped out and made his way along the shore, and there he found a man patting down a grave. And Colmcille, "What has happened here?" And he said, "This is my cousin. He lies here. He was out on the river when a monster came and attacked him. And he called for help. And his son here," Colmcille looked, and he was just a young boy of 16. He managed to get a hook into him and pull him ashore, but it was too late. And the boy said, he'd been eaten by the creature. And it's not the first time this has happened, because some of the locals had gathered now. This beast, it's horrible, it's horrendous. It's got huge fangs, it's got crimson blood eyes, and it's got a huge head and a tail like a snake, and it can rise up like a serpent and gobble as quick as a flash. Something has to be done. It spends most of its time in the loch, but it comes up the river and feeds freely on the people. Now, Colmcille was disgusted, and he decided he was going to put an end to this. And he turned to his brothers and said, "One of you, swim to the far shore and bring that boat back to me that you see on the other side." And a brave one stepped forward and jumped in and started to swim. Well, it wasn't long as the monk swam and the water spread out behind him in his wake that suddenly they saw the shape of that serpent moving through the water. And all of a sudden it raised up out of the water, and they saw the hideous head, they saw the hideous fangs, and they saw it sway, and then it went to attack and started to shoot down towards the feet till Colmcille roared, "Stop!" And the beast stopped stock still and looked about and swayed. And then Colmcille blessed the air, and he called out to that creature, begone from here, and return to the depths of the loch, and you will never return to this river again." And with that, the great beast, it seemed like it was being pulled back by chains or ropes, and it fell back and disappeared beneath the water, and disappeared out into the loch. And it never did come back to the river. Now, some people claim that they have seen that monster out in the Loch Ness monster. But we can't be sure whether that was an imaginary sighting or for real. But we do know that Colmcille had dealt with the great beast. And at this stage, Colmcille was leaving that area and heading back to Iona. And the king had come to see him off. But the Druids were still angry with him, and they tried to stop him. And as they climbed into the boat that the king had provided for him, to take him across the loch and then to continue back out to Iona, a storm started to blow up. And Brichon said, "You're going nowhere, Colmcille." And of course Colmcille knew he was up to his trickery. And he says, "Oh, we're going, all right, we're going." And they stepped onto the boat. And the king, he didn't want Colmcille to live, and he says, to leave. He said, don't go, it's too dangerous. Please, stay here." He says, "It's fine. These little tricks of your druid, they don't scare me." And he got onto the boat. And the druid was furious. He said, "You cannot leave. I will not let you leave." And his companions got on, and they faced the direction they needed to go. And the wind grew higher and higher, and it was blowing back towards them, and the sail was billowing out to the north, and then the king's cloak was billowing out behind him. Such was the wind. But Colmcille blessed himself, and he started to pray. And suddenly the wind started to shift. It started to shift, and suddenly it turned around, and now the wind was blowing in to the sail, and it billowed to the south, and the boat started to move. And they were safe. And the king was happy. And that was the end of the influence of the Druids, because they've been outsmarted yet again by Colmcille. The final piece is about Colmcille predicting what would happen when he died. As he was an older man, some of the monks commented one day that sure, the whole of Scotland, of Alban, would want to come, Dalriada as it was called, that area, would want to come to his funeral. And they all knew that his death wasn't far away. And he just smiled and he says, "No." He says, "My funeral will be simple. It will be simple with my family here of monks." And they found that hard to believe. His influence and power was so vast. But on the night that he drew his last breath, a storm blew up. And that storm that separated the land of Iona from the mainland, it churned and boiled the sea for 3 long days. and no boats were possible to cross over. Even the strongest and bravest of sailors refused to go across. And on the fourth day they wrapped that body in linen and buried him there on Iona. And just as he had predicted, there was no great fanfare on his final journey. And they are just some of the stories that I could tell you about Colmcille. There's many, many more. Many are anecdotes and to show, I suppose, to show how people felt about him, the power that they saw in him and his greatness. I hope you've enjoyed the stories, and I hope you enjoy all of the other talks and information that's going on in relation to Colmcille, a fascinating character from Donegal, from Garden. Thank you.